of the Burlington Board of Health, together with the Burlington School Committee, I call it to order on August 27th at 6 p.m.
Okay, you want
can
to
do the
roll
same.
call? You want to roll call your
No, I think-
members?
At this point, I will ask to respond. David McSweeney, are you on?
Sorry, I was on mute. I am here. Good evening.
Thank you. He is my vice chair. Libby Wallenjevich, she is a member.
Here.
Mary Beth Welch.
Here.
Dr. Wayne Saltzman at this time is tied up in another meeting. Hopefully he'll be able to join us a little later.
Okay. School Committee, Tom Murphy, Vice Chair.
Present.
Catherine Bond,
Here.
Martha Simon,
Present.
Carl Foss.
I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to read the intro to the meeting. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This joint meeting of the School Committee and the Board of Health is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. All right, now how about the Pledge of Allegiance? Libby?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Libby. Ed, do you want to go first with your chairman report?
Yes. Thank you, Chairperson Monaco. If you've been watching any of our Board of Health meetings, you've heard me talk about these unprecedented times and how you have heard the Board of Health has been working every day to do what we can to keep this community safe during the pandemic. This, on top of all our necessary public health, environmental, town development, and communicable diseases review. We have been very busy. Tonight, I have introduced my board members. Also with us tonight is Susan Luminello, our Director of Public Health. I want to thank Christine Monaco and the members of the Burlington School Committee, as well as Mr. Conti and all his leadership team for being here tonight and addressing the community. The Board of Health's role in this process is advisory. We serve as consultants to the school committee, and leadership. And we will not be voting on anything this evening. Thank you very much, Chairperson Monaco.
Thanks, Ed. I just want to echo what Ed has said and thank the entire Board of Health and Dr. Weiner. Ed and I have known each other for a long time, but we've never talked as much as we have in the past couple of months. The Board of Health has been so helpful, and I just can't express enough thanks to them for their input. We have quite a few staff on the call, Dr. Conti, Patrick Larkin, Bobby Cuna, and a lot of our teachers are on. And there's no, you can all look at the list, but I want to thank all of them for being here to participate in this joint meeting, which is a working meeting And the public comment tonight under public participation is suspended. However, we are hoping to get some comments or maybe some questions through Facebook Live. Does anyone know if it is on through Facebook Live?
It is on.
It is on. Okay, so Patrick Larkin has volunteered to keep an eye on it. If there's anything that's appropriate or important that we need to talk about, he'll let us know. So moving on from that, I would like to change the agenda very slightly and take out of order the state of the town. Susan Luminello, if you could talk about that, please, since you're the expert.
Susan, are you on mute?
I am not on mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yesterday, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health statistics were updated. Burlington is currently gray, which last week was white, so they changed the color coding from white to gray. This is the lowest classification, with a lowering of the average daily incident rate per 100,000 to 0.52 this week, and a percent positivity in the last 14 days of 0.27%. This is good news. However, we must all remember that we are here because of our ability to adapt to difficult changes and do the work that is necessary to keep everyone healthy. The work doesn't stop here, but must continue throughout the school year. That's why this collaboration between the Board of Health and the school committee is so important, and I want to thank both boards for their commitment to continued collaboration. The work of public health is the protection of entire populations through prevention and risk reduction strategies. As we all know, COVID-19 has brought new challenges. During the surge of the pandemic in April, Board of Health staff and volunteers were responding to approximately 10 to 15 cases per day. The difficult work of contacting positive individuals and putting them on isolation, as well as ensuring all of their close contacts adhered to quarantine requirements, began. Board of Health staff were assisted by over 15 volunteer nurses, physicians, and physician assistants in this effort. In fact, this was the beginning of our collaboration with the school department. School nurses Rosemary Pascal and Jessica Guerin worked with us for weeks on contact tracing and isolation and quarantine of individuals. Following the surge, as always, isolation of positive cases and quarantine of their close contacts continued, but thankfully with less cases. The Board of Health began the work of education on and enforcement of the many COVID-specific standards and governor orders. Every day we conducted contact tracing, issued isolation and quarantine requirements, interpret test results, respond to complaints, and provide education and interpretation on the numerous sector-specific standards, including requirements for restaurants, office spaces, recreational camps, daycare centers, youth sports, performance venues, and many more. As schools begin to move forward with reopening in Massachusetts, quick and efficient isolation and quarantine of individuals is the key component to stopping the spread of disease. I would like to thank school staff for formulating their plans to provide assistance with contact tracing. This includes having assigned seating in classrooms and at lunch to quickly identify close contacts so that information can be provided to the Board of Health. In the event of a positive case, the Board of Health and the school department will provide joint communication to parents with the most up-to-date and relevant information. Lastly, please know that the Board of Health is committed to continuing to be available as a resource to the school committee, Dr. Conti, school department staff, school nurses, and parents and family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. That's an excellent review.
Susan, that was awesome. Thank you. And I especially like the numbers. Ed, do you have any input before we go to the next item?
I think we can move ahead. I think we've had a good summary of where we're at in the town. It's clear that Burlington has done a wonderful job in keeping the numbers down. Not only the staff and not only the Board of Health and all of the other agencies in this community have worked together, but the people of this town has taken it seriously, and therefore we're in the white, I mean the gray tonight.
That's great. Okay, moving to the next item. Dr. Conti, would you like to provide your report?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the Board of Health for joining us this evening. Really appreciate your support. I think Susan and I we're beginning to have daily phone calls. So Susan, again, thank you for your time and your guidance. I guess what I'd like to start by saying, it's only because the community has responded so well that schools are even considering opening. So while we do a lot of work on the schools in isolation, we can't consider the schools, we only have to consider the schools as being part of a broader community. So it's just because the broader community has responded so well, that the schools even have that option. So again, Dr. Weiner, again, thank you for giving us the context to even consider opening schools. So where we are right now, Madam Chair, is we've been working on a lot of the details of scheduling. We've gotten more detailed information as to which students are going to be attending school and which students are going to need to be educated from home. So I can go through that that information right now with you. So we have 402 students at the elementary level who have selected a full remote teaching experience, and that's 24% district-wide. We have 138 students at the middle school level who have selected a fully remote experience. That's 18% of our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And we have 119 students at the high school. And that's, again, grades 9, 10, 11, 12. And that is 13% of our high school students. So again, roughly overall, if you want to look district-wide, we have about 80% of our students wanting some sort of in-person experience and about 20% of our students seeking a fully remote school experience. Our teachers have been in training this week. I want to thank them for all of their effort and their energy and focus. We've allowed the teachers during the first 5 days to experience their professional development both in person and remotely. We've probably had about 50% of our staff in person and then about 50% of our staff participating remotely, and that sort of goes up and down and changes every day, again, as it should. And I want to make sure that I thank Patrick Larkin and his staff, Dennis Villano. They really created, I think, very good professional development opportunities, and they built the professional development calendar so that teachers could participate remotely. So I think we've had, I think, a good start and a good opening with teachers here. And again, we have one more week of training before students begin to arrive. Our first day for most of our students is going to be Thursday, September 10th. We will have some students in the buildings next week. Some of our high need students will start next week, and we're going to begin on a gradual level and really try to do this carefully and safely. I think another positive thing that I can report to the school committee tonight is I believe that every teacher who has requested and qualified for a remote accommodation we've accommodated that remote accommodation. So I think having the numbers of students that we have in our remote learning, again, the structure is a little bit different at the middle school and high school, but we've essentially created a 5th elementary school, a remote academy, and we're using a lot of our teachers who qualified for a remote accommodation. We're staffing that remote academy with those teachers. So I think that was again a positive development that we are continuing to work on. Also today, another positive development is we got back our HVAC analysis, and we had received our air quality baseline numbers prior to that. So in a few minutes, I'm going to ask Bob Cuna to talk about some of those air quality reports. We did just receive the balance of them at 4:30, so we haven't had a whole lot of time with them. But Bob can talk about some of the general information, and I know there are some outstanding questions about the reports. Um, Madam Chair, I'm sort of preempting a question, is will the reports be available publicly? Of course they will. Again, we need an opportunity, but we will have the reports available on our website for people to look at if they want. And just a reminder for the air quality reports that they're a baseline report. So it's really only going to be future samples in relation to the baseline that really help us. I think the baseline information is just that. Next week, our focus really needs to be on transportation. We haven't quite gotten to how transportation is going to get figured out. You all know that the capacity of our buses, given the social distancing that required, is being reduced to about 40%. So that's going to be our next puzzle that we have to solve. Also next week, Susan and I are going to block out some significant time to talk about communication protocols, because a lot of the communication needs to be coordinated between the Board of Health and the school district. And I also think what principals have asked for are some scenario rehearsals. So we'd also like to involve the Board of Health in some scenario rehearsals. What happens if we have a positive? How does all that work? Who's going to communicate? Where does it come from? What details do we want? Because one thing in my meetings with parents that has been clear is they want as much information as quickly as possible. And I think they understand there are some privacy issues, but they do want as much information, and they want it to be again, as quick and as thorough as possible. So I think Susan and I are going to work on some of those communication protocols, and would actually like to run through some scenarios with our building administrators. So if and when we bump into those scenarios, it won't feel like the first time. As in some other areas of our planning, I think the school district is taking a higher level of precaution, a more conservative level of precaution than the state is requiring. So two of those areas that we've discussed before are mask wearing. The state is only requiring students age from grade 2 and up to wear masks. We are requiring all students to wear masks. So I think that's where we're having a higher standard there, and of course all faculty and staff. I think the other standard that we are trying to maintain, and I think we are accomplishing, giving the number of students that have selected to be fully remote, and some of the changes in the furniture available in our schools, is we believe we can achieve a 6 feet of social distancing. In our early feasibility studies, we thought we could get between 4 and 5 if all the students had returned, and given some of our furniture constraints. But I think with the at the elementary level, with 402 students selecting a fully remote, and again, some changes from tables to desks, I believe we can obtain a 6-foot distancing at the elementary level, or very close to 6 feet. And again, the state is saying a minimum of 3, but that wasn't good enough for us, so we're having a higher standard. The third area where I believe where we should have a higher standard, Susan and I discussed that, I think this morning, is the Mass Department of Public Health and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education had conflicting protocols on what a close contact is, what defines a close contact. And they sort of came together on a standard that a close contact are people who are within 6 feet of one another for 10 to 15 minutes indoors. And so technically, we could be in compliance with that standard in an elementary classroom. If we had a positive case, we could just identify certain students who are around the one student and quarantine only those students. But instructionally, and we feel what would be a higher standard and a more conservative way of dealing with that would be to quarantine the entire classroom just to be safe. So Susan and I were talking about that, especially at the elementary level and probably to the middle school. But we're going to spend some time next week defining that and communicating that to parents. So I think whenever possible, we've taken a higher standard than the protocols being required by the state. And again, that is to make sure that we are providing every opportunity for our students to stay in school. Again, would just like to remind parents, they are critical partners in keeping schools open. The health screenings that they need to do for their children every day are very important. We're going to give parents a checklist. They need to make sure their children aren't displaying any symptoms prior to sending them to school. We're also spending some time during the first 2 weeks of training with teachers to make sure teachers are aware of their own health protocols so that they don't come to work if they're experiencing any of those symptoms. It's only going to be as a full community that we all practice cautions and make sure that, again, our community remains safe, and in so doing, make sure that our schools can remain open. So to both committees, I think the latest information that we have that I'd like to review now are the HVAC report and the air quality report. Both were conducted by outside firms. There are two different firms that did both of those reports. And as you can imagine, the firms doing this work have been very busy during the summer and the fall because of all the plans to have schools open. So with that, Bob, I'm going to shut off my mic and turn it over to you and have you discuss both the air quality baseline and the HVAC. I think some of the questions that are coming up, especially with the air quality, again, I think you and I have talked about this, is the sort of the 30% initial baseline. You know, is that enough? Why don't they test 100%? Those are some of the questions. And I think with some of the HVAC, it was, you know, where were the measurements done? Was every classroom looked at, or did they just sample? Again, did they just sample that? Because the reports are very different, and I think the sampling techniques were very different. So, Madam Chair, with your permission, I was going to turn it over to Bob Cuna.
Thank you to the chair. So again, thank you, Dr. Conti. First and foremost, I want to say that obviously we take staff and student safety very seriously. I can go on about how this is a trying time and this is new for all of us. But really what's new for us is that we run a limited HVAC system during the summer. And we typically don't turn our HVAC systems on until later in the year, September, October. So this is really a newer process. Not only that, these tests came in obviously just recently, but even the ask for the requests for these tests came in a short time frame as well. So getting these tests done, having the test performed, reviewing the data has taken longer than maybe the community and our staff have wanted it to be. But there are reasons for that. You know, most HVAC companies and engineering firms are busy already during the summer, and then when we have a pandemic like this, it adds to that. Again, with that being said, though, we did look to have outside engineering firms come in. We do have in-house staff that look at our equipment as well. But again, for time frame and also the expertise of having them come in, one, of course, is the air quality test. And some will say, well, what's that doing if there's nobody in the building? Well, there are some people in the building, and we wanted to know what our baseline is without people in the building, so we know where to start from. We looked at everything from particulate matter to hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide readings, even the humidity in the room and so forth. So we have that, again, in about 20 to 30% of each building. That's not a scientific 20 to 30%. We didn't calculate by saying, let's go to 6.4 rooms. The rooms and the buildings are not set up in that particular area. So to get the baseline, We went to sections of the building that made sense to the engineering firm, and then we used those for the baseline. We do plan to move those measurements around the district and around each building, so we can get different samples again once the students and staff are in the buildings. So not next week, Monday, but September 8th week is when we'll start to do these testings again, when there are more people in the building. Unfortunately, tonight, because we've had to reschedule the meeting, an engineering firm that did the air quality is not able to attend the meeting, but they are available should we have additional questions. And again, we will make these reports available. The second report that we're looking at is from an engineering firm just to do an HVAC assessment. And I think what I need to kind of get out to a lot of people is that there's a lot of terms being used right now. I myself am not an HVAC expert. But again, when people discuss air quality, I think people conflate what air quality is versus airflow. When people talk about outside air versus inside air, some of that gets conflated as well too. I would say in most HVAC companies would say we only really have perfect days a few times a year, and perfect days basically mean when the outside air temperature versus the inside air temperature is minimal differences. And then we can obviously have systems that are working efficiently. We can actually have a really efficient HVAC system. When we get to those extremes, the really, really hot days and the really, really cold days, that's when our systems are designed to really heat and cool air. The secondary function of these is really the air filtering. But I think in a lot of this pandemic situation, people believe or would love to see that our systems are designed to be pandemic filtering as first. So again, if we can please remember that these are designed really for heating and cooling. With that being said, though, what we also did is we looked at the flow from our machines, what it was capable and not capable of accepting higher grade filters such as MERV 8, MERV 13 filters. We also looked at the size of the room, the number of students that would potentially be in the room, if there were windows, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. I think we all know that our systems are not the newest systems in the whole entire world, but our systems, from at least the results that we're looking at currently, we'll see that they are functioning as designed. And we did find systems that needed repair or needed maintenance. And that's great that we did these tests because it gave us valuable data as well, too. So the past week or the past couple of days when we were notified that some machines we couldn't get data out of, we've been able to have crews look at those. We've been able to order parts for them. Minimal number of machines, but again, it's good because we're typically not looking at those right now. We're typically getting ready to open the building for school and then looking at these machines after the start of school. So again, our engineering firm that we did hire for this, BLW Engineers, Ken Beck is on the phone. And again, please remember that Ken Beck is not here to certify that our equipment is brand new because again, we have asked in the past, especially at the high school, with some of our oldest systems to have them replaced. We would have other buildings as well too that we would like to have replaced because we have older equipment. But we do our best to definitely maintain them and make sure they're running at top shape. And these tests are beneficial for us as well too, because we get the good data to make sure that we're meeting the demands for fresh air and machines that function. So I'm not sure. I'm sure I could talk all night long, but I think if I could turn it over for a second, maybe to the chair, or if there's some other questions that you want to ask me or Ken, I'd love to introduce Ken in a second. But again, if the chair has a question, please.
I would, since
Dr.
this is,
Warner, would you like to go through your board and see if anyone has questions?
well, if we have an expert on the line, I really would like to hear from them. If they're not on the line, I would like to make the report available, but Mr. Cunha, is he on the phone now?
Yes, he is.
Would he be willing to say something?
Ken, can I introduce Ken Beck, please? And Ken, can you say hi to the board? Let me see where he is.
We have 4 Collins.
Right.
Hello?
Hi, Ken.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. My name is Ken Beck with BLW Engineers. I'm a professional engineer and principal of the company. And we were the ones who performed the evaluations and assessments of your HVAC systems in all 6 of your schools. I think Bob did a pretty good job of explaining this, the methodology. We visited each school, determined what the system was, reviewed the original design documentation to determine the capabilities of the systems, coordinated with the school department on how they were planning to reoccupy the school during the pandemic, and then based on that and all the applicable guidelines that are, that we are trying to adhere to in ASHRAE and CDC and the state and the Mass Teachers Association, we made recommendations on how the systems could be operated and change the functions a little bit so that they could best suit those recommendations that are in guidelines. We have a list of recommendations for each school that are particular to each school, and we also have a list of things that that may need to be supplemented in terms of when the conditions turn to the heating season. So there's quite a list of recommendations that we go through for each school, and the good thing is all your schools met code currently for ventilation rates, and so based on the plan to reoccupy the schools at approximately 50%. In most of the schools, you're actually doubling the code required ventilation in all those schools. So that's a big help. And at the beginning of the school, when the temperature allows, we'll be able to run even more ventilation in those spaces. A lot of the recommendations come down to filtration, how you operate the system, outdoor air, and methodologies for continual exhaust, pre and post occupation, continuous temperature control. So there's a lot of things that are there, but the good thing is there's a pathway for each school to get to the guidelines.
Thank you very much. Since we're going to open this up for the Board of Health for concerns, do any of the Board of Health members have any questions for the engineer that's on the line right now? Okay, I guess not. How about the school committee? Can I ask Madam Chairman for asking your school committee if they have any comments?
Yeah, sure. Any school committee members want a question or comment? Eric?
I'm not a committee member, Madam Chair, and I'm certainly not an HVAC expert. And Bob or Ken, there's a lot of conversations about MERV levels.
Yes.
And what that means. Could you try to explain it to me or someone who doesn't understand HVAC systems? Because I think there's a lot of numbers and terms being used, and again, it's all new to me.
Right. So MERV is the actual efficiency of the filter. So the higher the MERV, the better efficiency. So a MERV 13 is more efficient than a MERV 8. Unfortunately, MERV 13 filters have a high pressure drop associated with it. It means it needs a lot of horsepower behind it to pull air through it. So a lot of your older equipment that was originally designed with the filters available at the time, which is mostly MERV 8, doesn't have that capability to absorb that additional pressure drop. So it's actually would be detrimental to your heating and air conditioning and ventilation systems to put that type of filter on old equipment. You don't need, so the recommendations are, they would like to see those MERV type filter, MERV 13 filters on systems that have recirculation. But, there is a pathway in all the guidelines that if there's a large percentage of recirculation, that you can use portable HEPA filters instead. So it's not a definitive that you have to have the MERV 13 filters, but there is I think in the Marshall Simon schools you have them already. So that school already has them. Some of the other schools are capable of accommodating them, and there's a couple that aren't, but don't have large percentages of outside air. And then there's areas that do have recirculated air that, there should be some consideration for portable HEPA filters.
And Ken and the board, through the chair, if you don't mind. So the Memorial School, which is obviously the newer of the schools, has some systems that are MERV 13 capable and have MERV 13 filters available in them. The new addition on the middle school has a different heating and HVAC system than the rest of the existing building, even though the whole building was renovated. The HVAC system in the existing was not. So the newer part of the building has a forced air system that obviously is different than the univents that are in the older building. So the complete middle school does not have the capabilities of the MERV 13 filters.
Bob, the HEPA filters that they mentioned, what are those?
So there's a couple of recommendations.
Can
Sorry.
anyone hear me?
Yes.
Chris, yes, we can hear you.
Chris Monaco?
All right, Mr. Murphy? There she is.
I think she has connection problems. Why don't we circle back to Bob? He was in the process of answering your question.
Right. So in regards to the portable HEPA filter conversation that you asked Dr. Conti was at, we have a couple of situations where in the code books, we look to bring in fresh air and exchange that fresh air a certain number of times throughout the building. The current code is 2. During the pandemic time, there's recommendations to make that higher. And there are additional ways to do that besides just the HVAC system. One would be potentially opening up windows and then running fans potentially either in reverse or box windows in the fans to draw outside fresh air in. On places where you can't have windows or the HVAC system does not bring in enough fresh air or circulate the air enough times, that's when a recommendation, or anytime technically, but that's when the recommendation for a HEPA filter would be to add into that space. Again, when you can't bring in enough fresh air, you don't have many windows to bring in fresh air, and during certain types of the season, again, when those extremes, the hots and colds, and the system needs to kind of close the damper a little bit so it actually can regulate the hot and cold temperature in the room. That's when we may need to look at bringing in some additional HEPA filters for certain spaces.
So thank you. So again, Ken, just in summary for, again, someone who's not an HVAC person, you said our buildings are all within the codes that have been established for reentry?
So they met, yes, they are. There are pathways for every school here. The way you're planning to reoccupy them, that we're doubling the ventilation of the current code requirements. So they're, based on how you operate them and, different control strategies, there are pathways to get every school in compliance.
Can you guys hear me now? I had trouble with the connection.
We can hear you.
Okay, I think that there are other questions. Carl, did you get to ask yours yet?
Not yet. Thank you so much. And thank you for these reports. I haven't had enough time to look at them very, very closely, but one phrase that I've seen on several of them includes based on reduced classroom sizes. And in your initial remarks, you mentioned about 50%. So just to clarify, what you're saying is if we have half the number of kids in each classroom, then we can meet the air exchange. And excuse me if I'm using the wrong terminology, because I should have laid out the disclaimer that I am not an HVAC expert either.
Well, no, I don't. I think that's so. Based on the guidelines from the state in terms of social distancing and how the schools are going to be occupied, you're basically going to reduce the capacity of the classrooms to close to half, and that's just the natural progression of how the guidelines have been set up in terms of what they're requiring for the social distancing. But we have you do have the code required ventilation for a fully occupied building. What I'm saying is based on the planned occupancy, you're actually doubling that. So it's either making it better or more. You're bringing more fresh air per person into the space versus what the fully occupied building would be.
And Carl, through the chair, if I could address Carl as well too, Mr. Foss. I think that's the key to your question is that the planned occupancy of when the buildings and the classrooms were designed. So the HVAC systems were designed to occupy those spaces. In Burlington, we're pretty fortunate to have smaller than other town classrooms in the beginning. So when we say reduce 50%, it's not reduced off of our current enrollment. It's reduced on the planned occupancy of what that space would have had when the room was built or the building was designed.
Thanks, both of you. Appreciate it.
This is Ed Weiner. Do the board members, the Board of Health members, have any questions at this time for Mr. Cunha?
Chair, I do. My hand has been raised, but I don't know if people are checking that.
This is Dr. Wayne Saltzman, who has now joined us. He is a Board of Health member, as I'm sure everybody knows.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm listening to fresh air exchange and reversing fans and all of that. I haven't heard the magic word of winter yet. How does winter change or alter these considerations, if at all? Given heat's going to be on in the room, can't really, what does bringing fresh air mean? How does a winter system different from the system that the kids are going to be put in
So
once they return?
So I can answer. That's how we evaluated the capabilities of the system, is on heating and cooling and what they were originally designed for. So when a building is designed, the code requirement is to provide a certain ventilation rate per occupant per space when it is in heating and cooling. So your buildings met those code requirements when it was in heating and cooling. And now with the reduced occupancy, you're actually going to be doubling those, or sometimes tripling those, because some of those spaces had significantly more air than the occupant load that you have there now. So you're going to be more than doubling in all cases. So the
Mrs. Simon had questions.
Yes, I just wanted to finish up though. The idea was that when conditions allowed, you could actually bring more air beyond that into the spaces, just for making the space even safer.
I'd like to just see if that question is done. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Martha, go ahead.
Thank you. So also am not an HVAC or air quality expert, but I did read through the reports, and there was a lot of commonality among them, and there were a lot of recommendations about things that if we maintain, if we clean our filters, if we disinfect in certain ways, then the final result they felt would be within code, satisfactory. And it sounded to me, so my question maybe is for Mr. Beck, but maybe is for Mr. Cunha. is our district able to, do we have enough custodians and repair people to do those repairs and to update and maintain the equipment that we have? And so when you look through that list of questions, do you feel that we can meet those ways that we're being recommended in order to meet the codes and meet beyond the codes?
I'll address that one, Ms. Simon. So there are a couple of ways that we are looking at this. Like I said, originally we would be doing these startups later. The fact that we're looking at them now, we've already begun to address some of those situations. Again, where we fall either faulty or underperforming equipment. In addition to, we have HVAC contracts with HVAC companies that do come in and help support us, while we do also have in-house maintenance staff as well too. So it's kind of a double-ended answer to your question, and I apologize for that. I would say typically we have a system in place where we can handle the amount of work that is needed to do it. We are doing it currently. We believe the systems are running in an efficient way, and we are trying to stay on top of those as well with the help of our outside HVAC companies. So if that was to change, I think I would let Dr. Conti and the board know. But I think right now, given, like I said, the way that the equipment is running, I believe we're okay in that.
Thank you. Through the chair, if I could ask another question. It's my understanding that we have already purchased some of these HEPA filters, and I just wanted to know if you have begun to match up areas of buildings that seem like they may need it with the ones we have, and will we have purchase more and that kind of thing?
Through the chair, yes. So originally, the HEPA filters were purchased for isolation rooms as part of the reopening plan to address those particular rooms. And also we had a few accommodations to meet as well too for particular staff. So those particular HEPA filters are in use or will be placed in the position or the rooms that they are intended for. We do not have additional spares to put in other places.
But given the report, do you feel like you have enough to meet the needs of what was reported? I'm not sure that's a clear question, but does that make sense?
So again, I haven't fully digested the whole report, and I think I know some of the guy. I think I know where you're going with that question, so hopefully I will answer it. Given the spaces that we're looking at, I think we'll have to readdress them as we get closer towards the heating system. But looking at the way that the HVAC systems are and when we can offset those with windows, I think we'll also have to have a bigger conversation, the happy balance between an efficient room temperature wise and an efficient or comfortable room with HVAC. So I guess the question would be is if we're able to run the temperature a few more degrees colder, then we can bring in fresh air longer. And I think we just have to look at addressing those things. So we'll have to be, crafty with some of the ways that we look at it, and that's addressed in the reports as well too. So not every single space is going to require a HEPA filter. It would be nice in certain situations. It may be nice for all rooms, but that I think is a bigger conversation that the board and myself and Dr. Conti would need to have if we were looking to put those throughout the district.
And if I could sort of add on to this question about the portable HEPAs, there was also recommendations, probably more, but additional space heaters and UV decontamination things. Do we have those, and are we all set to address the areas that were found to need these things?
We do not have those things. These recommendations are ones that we would obviously have to review as a community, as a school department, and see which ones benefited us in the immediate, benefited us in the long run, and ones that we could financially put in place. I think that's why the report looks at some things that are immediate and some other things that are secondary for us to consider. So I think future conversations and depending on the heating season, depending on the pandemic level as well too, will suggest us in a path that we take for future steps on these.
Okay. I do have another question.
Go ahead, Martha.
Thank you. So I do feel like in the general recommendations that the information I have received, it seems as though we're looking at the general holistic reports that we do have PPE, we are increasing the disinfecting, we're looking at limiting visitors, we are developing our communication protocols and all those other things. So that is a really reassuring thing, but I also know that I have access to more information because I'm on the school committee. And I just wanted to communicate to the public that, it does appear that the vast majority of the recommendations, I know we have that information and we have those, either those protocols in place or we're, as Dr. Conti mentioned a few minutes ago, we're in the process of developing those protocols. And I understand that for people who haven't had that conversation like I have with Dr. Conti, it can be very concerning. But I hope that people understand that Dr. Conti was working on getting the teachers for the classrooms and he's resolved that issue. And now there are other issues that have not been completed. I know there have been some protocols that have already been completed with the Board of Health. There's more to be done. And I just wanted to say that for the public who's listening, that many of the questions that we've received are things that are perhaps not resolved yet, but are being resolved, in the sense that they're not being ignored. So I did want to say that as I read the reports, it did seem to me that we are addressing any areas that need to be looked at. And there was one other thing.
We are talking about air quality right now. We got lots of other stuff to talk about. So
Through the chair, can I add one point?
Sure.
So earlier when I discussed some confusing conversations that are happening when people discuss air quality and whatnot and code and recommendations and guidance, typically in code they look at a 3-foot area, and I'm unaware of any pandemic code. So the guidance and the recommendations, again, that are things that this board looks at or our town looks at as far as recommendations go. But again, the codes don't address 6-foot distancing. The codes don't address wearing masks and things like that. They really talk about the recommendations for how the HVAC system could bring in air. So again, when you put a lot of the other guidance in place with the distancing, with the mask wearing, with the hand sanitizing, offsetting fresh air by opening windows, and our systems running at what we're calling a half capacity as compared to what were planned for, I think you have a broader picture of what we're actually discussing as opposed to just saying double the number of students in a small classroom with no fresh air coming in. So again, if we could just be mindful of what the whole picture is, especially when we talk about guidance versus code. So.
thank you.
Okay. Are there any other members of either board that wish to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, this is Ed Weiner. I've waited until the end here. First, I have been monitoring the Facebook as well. For some clarification to many of the parents who've asked if somebody becomes positive, will they be notified? If there is a problem of a COVID case, the schools can choose to shut down that room for 14 days for deep cleaning. But all of those who are exposed, based on the definition of exposure, will need to be quarantined for 14 days as required by the state. And in that way, because of contact tracing, they will all be notified either by our Board of Health or by the state. But I would assume it would be by our Board of Health and by members of school leadership. Also, the Board of Health has had multiple discussions with the chair and with others. We've read hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents that were sent to us. We have had 3 posted meetings this week alone. We've had the Board of Health presentations by the school on Tuesday night. Tuesday, we also had a walkthrough, which I'll refer to again, and we have this meeting. But I want to get back to the walkthrough. With all of the reading and all of the discussion, it did not replace the walkthrough of the high school. There are many questions here on Facebook that could be answered if the school committee and Dr. Conti and others considered a quick walkthrough with BCAT of the school to see how much has really been done. There are questions, for instance, about the hallways and about lunch. All of those were my concerns until the walkthrough, which I saw how well the planning was for lunch and how each individual hallway is one way and not 2 ways to keep people apart and to keep people 6 feet apart. So I want to urge the school committee, leadership of the schools, to possibly talk to BCAT and do a walkthrough. It was very impressive, and it really fills in quite a lot of questions that we have had and that were answered. There are also questions here concerning, as we have heard, about the airflow. When will the Board of Health be able to get those reports? Have they been forwarded to us, the ones that have just come in?
This is Susan. So they were forwarded today, and we can get them to board members. We haven't had a chance to look at them.
And just as to add to that, we do have an environmental engineer within the Board of Health, one of the few boards of health in the country which has an environmental engineer who will review all of those pages and all of those numbers. The only other comment that I have is, because I have been living this as well as all members of the Board of Health for months now, is if you have questions, feel free to call the Board of Health. Feel free to email me, email our director, email who can pass it along to our other staff. We'd be happy. I think that in a discussion today with our Director of Public Health, I was so pleased when she said every single question and inquiry that was forwarded to her, she has answered, or she has picked up the phone and called. I have called many people, but if you continue to have questions, feel free to call the board. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just also make a comment about what quarantine means?
Yes, sure.
Sure. Thank you. So I think a lot of people get confused with the terms isolation and quarantine. So isolation is when somebody is actually sick and test positive for COVID. So if we have a positive case, that person is going to go on isolation. That means they're home until released from the Board of Health. Anyone that person has come into close contact with, which is defined by Department of Public Health, within 6 feet for 10 minutes or more, then goes on to quarantine. Quarantine is an individual who is not sick but has come into close contact. Those people need to go home and stay home until released by the Board of Health. So everyone on isolation and quarantine is contacted on a regular basis by the Board of Health. So in the event that we did have to, the school department, like Dr. Weiner said, has the choice to close down a classroom if they so choose, if we have a positive case. When that happens, the Board of Health will be doing an investigation and determining which children in that classroom will actually need to go on quarantine, meaning they will not be able to go to school. They will not be able to leave their house for any other reason. They need to stay home for 2 weeks. So I just wanted to make that clear that, even though a classroom is being closed for 2 weeks, that may not necessarily mean that every child in that classroom is now on quarantine or official quarantine from the Board of Health. And if anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer.
Susan, that was extremely helpful, because I think there are people who would like to see the classroom, if there is a positive case, they'd like to see the whole classroom, quote, quarantine. But as you explained it, some of the kids in that classroom, while we may have the classroom closed, they're not technically quarantined. They just aren't in school. And that's very helpful. Dr. Conti.
Susan, would you just take a few minutes and explain the differences between testing and the probable positive versus the better testing? Because I think there's some confusion there as well.
So when someone gets tested, there are different types of tests out there now. There's molecular tests or PCR tests, and then there's antigen tests and antibody tests. So people get very confused when they go to get tested about what type of test they're getting. The Board of Health and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health considers a PCR test or a molecular test a positive case if they come out positive on that test. If you come out positive on an antigen or antibody test, then you are a probable case. And the Board of Health is going to recommend that you go get the PCR test. We are treating all probable cases as a case. So we're going to put you on isolation if we see that you had an antibody or antigen test. But we can't say for sure that you're going to test positive on a molecular test. So we are going to recommend that you go back and get the PCR test. If someone chooses not to get a PCR test, then they need to remain in quarantine for the time period until the Board of Health says that they can leave quarantine. So I think that a lot of people are going to have questions about, if there's a positive case in a child's classroom, should I get my child tested? Well, if you're determined to be a close contact, we're going to recommend that you do get tested. The child does get tested and gets a PCR test or a molecular test, and not an antibody or antigen testing. If you're on the other side of the classroom, if the child had no close contact with the positive case, they would not be considered to be on quarantine. We will not contact them, and at that time, we would not recommend testing. Anyone who is on quarantine will be contacted by us promptly. So you will know quickly if your child is on quarantine.
And now just one other question. If a classroom is closed, will those students be eligible for remote schooling? That question has come up a number of times here in on my Facebook.
Dr. Weiner, the answer to that is yes. So one of the reasons that we would, I think, take the higher standard and we would have the entire class out is the teacher it would be much easier for the teacher to continue remote instruction to the entire class. We've also built our hybrid schedules to mimic our remote schedules. So the students' day, the routine of the day, really wouldn't change that much, other than they wouldn't be coming into school. So,
thank you very much.
Dr. Conti, that applies to the elementary school. Does it also apply to the middle school?
Mrs. Monaco, Madam Chair, we were thinking of K to 8 because the students are cohorted K to 8 in terms of they're staying in the same class. Mm-hmm. So that may be the best way for us to be conservative K to 8. The high school is going to be a little bit different because the students are switching classes. And Susan and I are still working through some scenarios. but because the high school is doing such a good job of keeping track of where the kids are, that again, I think we would do some contact tracing through the Board of Health. Any of the students considered to be close contact would be notified, and then we would really make the decision after that. Susan, I want to put words in your mouth, but you really told me the situations that we need to be careful of, and I want to make sure I use the right term, is if we have positive tests that really aren't related to one another. If the Board of Health does contact tracing and says, boy, there's a positive case on this side of the building and another completely unrelated positive case, then that shows that there's higher positivity in the community as a whole. Is that correct, Susan? And you had a term for that, and I don't want to misspeak, but if there are some cases that can be contact traced or close together, and that makes logical sense, maybe siblings or something like that, that presents a different scenario. So it's not just simply the number of cases that would close a classroom or close a school, for instance. It's also the type of cases and where those cases are arising from. And again, I wouldn't be making that decision. I don't have the background to do that. I would consult with Susan. Susan would make a recommendation, and then ultimately I would make the decision, but with her guidance. So Susan, what was the term that you used when there were unrelated cases that were popping up?
So there is, I think I used two terms. One would be a cluster. So if we found that there was a cluster in a case, a cluster in the school, which is 3 or more cases that we know are linked, we would do further investigation to determine how those cases are linked. And then if we determine that the cases are not linked, then that may be school-based spread, and that's something that we would need to have to find out. So there is no way that we can say, yes, in this scenario, we would recommend it. In this scenario, we wouldn't. It's all going to depend upon our case investigation. And this is something that we do here through interviews with the parents and where their children have been. I mean, it's possible if you have 2 cases in different classrooms that they were both on the same soccer team or out, friends and out together. So all those things we're looking at and trying to determine where, who the initial case was and where these children got infected. And then based on that, we would have discussions with the Mass Department of Public Health, Epidemiology Division, and most likely would bring them into it, have discussions with them, and then determine what type of recommendations we would give the schools with regards to closure. And there was one other question here. I think the question was, if the desks are being spaced 6 feet apart, when would they be considered a close contact? So I just wanted to answer that. So we're going to be the most conservative in thinking about close contact. So if you have the desks are spaced, it's actually head to head, which is 6 feet apart. So if you've got 2 kids leaning over, talking for an extended period of time, and it, regardless of whether they have their masks on, it's based on distance and time, and not mask wearing. Although mask wearing is important. If they're leaning over, speaking to each other, we're going to take that into consideration. And then they were in close contact for 10 minutes or more. So when we do our investigation, we're going to be the most conservative about it. And that is why it's very important to have assigned seating and to know who was sitting next to who. So we have all that. We're going to have that for every school. And that's where we're going to collaborate with the schools to get that information, which is very important.
Thank you, Susan. That was great. Are there other questions?
Someone's asking a question. It's a good one.
I think the next phase is we need to go into at some point is where do we go from here? Oh, wait, there's a question coming in. I'm sorry.
I don't care in French. It's je m'en fous. Use it wisely.
Okay. Where do we go from here? We have most processes, most plans in place. We still have some to continue to flush out. In addition, we need to continue communication. I think this was another step, the third step this week in providing information. Then how are we going to move forward? First in communicating, and I think that between boards and between professionals will work out without fail. But how do we continue to provide information to the public? Will the school department do that in conjunction with us, or what is the mechanism for you to continue to provide the public as we get closer to the opening of school? I think that's very important. And I think we need to at least come up with some types of ideas tonight to make sure, because the Board of Health does not meet until the second week in September. The school committee meets approximately the same time. For the most part, we have 1 to 2 weeks, 1 week or 10 days in limbo. How are we going to communicate?
Dr. Conti, do you have input?
Yes, I do. And there's, again, a couple questions that I want to make sure that we address as well. So, Dr. Weiner, I really like your idea of doing some walkthroughs with BCAT. So I think that's something that we can do. We've been trying to do Thursday night shows for parents in terms of communication. So that's something that we will work on. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think Susan and I in our call today committed to making sure that we have our communication protocols developed and shared, and then we run through some scenarios. So just like we run fire drills, we would run some scenarios where what would happen, and we can run through some of those scenarios. I think it's important for the school committee to know that the information that the Board of Health receives does not come directly to the school district. So we are dependent on good communication, which we have through the Board of Health. So no one's going to tell us if there's a student who is tested positive. That information goes from the Mass Department of Public Health to the local Board of Health, and then that would be shared with the school district. So we're going to have to communicate together, and I think we're prepared to do that. Susan and I talked about developing some form letters, both for close contact families and for other situations, so that we can make sure the letters get out quickly and efficiently. So I think. Dr. Weiner, the other thing that we're trying to put together are some flow charts. So again, if this happens, then what comes next for our building leaders? And again, running through different scenarios like we would with our fire drill. I think next week, the principals in each building are really planning on going through the traffic patterns in the buildings, making sure that all the adults are aware of which hallways are one way, which staircases are up, which staircases are down. And I think all that planning is taking place. And then the question that comes up a lot for us too is what's happening with the bathrooms. And again, all the principals, students will be signing out of class. They'll be signing into class, and all the bathrooms are going to be single use. So one student at a time, and then we'll be keeping track of who's in and who's out and where those students are. A question, Bob, to you was, did BLW analyze the data on the train reports? Why were there two names, I guess the train and the BLW, and did they use the data from the train reports for their final reports?
Thank you, Dr. Conti. So again, I guess there's a couple of things going on, meaning that Train is not only the manufacturer of some of our equipment, but they're also some HVAC company that we're in contract with as well too. They are the company that helps us perform startups, do additional tasks and so forth that is either outside of our scope or again, just assist us with repairs and so forth on their equipment. So during their startup, we ask for additional information. So that way they can help us analyze the quality and the efficiency of the equipment. Ken Beck from BLW had a different scope of work, and they're really were hired to look at the design of the buildings, the data of the buildings, and help us provide a pathway and a plan towards opening school. So while they did review the data, that's not what the focus of their report is to look at the data and say, yes, I agree that whatever. They would use that as one tool or one piece of evidence in their report to then help us get to a plan of opening schools. So again, different companies provided different assistance for our collection of data.
So Bob, I don't mean to be obtuse, but they had access to the train data?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so they did use the train data to inform the reports that they created?
Yep. So they use the data to not only calculate, some of our code requirements and so forth, but also to provide recommendations moving forward in our plan.
There was a question on Facebook, and I just want to make sure I'm answering it or asking it properly. Is what about classrooms that have zero functioning ventilation? Were there any classrooms that had zero functioning ventilation?
Yes, we did find some on the reports that either the machines would not start up or needed parts and materials. So they're indicated on the spreadsheets that they were not functioning, or you may see no data from a flow. Obviously, if it had baseboard heating or something like that, you wouldn't see any flow from those reports anyways. But that's also what we use to then turn around and put those repairs in place for those machines. So we'll go back and repair those and then re-look at the airflow of those machines once they're functioning.
Okay,
some
so
of it has already taken place and some is ongoing.
So we would address any zero functioning ventilation systems?
Yes, sir.
And the other thing I think that was important to teachers that I've spoken with is because a lot of this work is done underneath the cover, they wanted some sort of visual sticker, I don't know, some sort of visual marker that the ventilation system was evaluated and is functioning. Is that taking place?
That has already taken place. Training has been in-house in multiple days. And when they were to look at a machine or look at a classroom, when they perform those data points, then they would put a sticker on a machine. If the machine did not give us a result from it or one that needed repair, there was no sticker put on that machine. So that's indicated again on our spreadsheets as well. So we know if there's no functioning machine, if there's no flow from a machine, and if there was a sticker placed on it, we knew that where we needed to go back for repair.
All right, so if teacher sees a sticker, they know it's a functioning unit.
That is one way, yes, and then they'll also see it on the reports.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, I just, those are Patrick is feeding me questions. Those are the questions that I had. I think where we go from here is we will continue to communicate. Again, I think Susan and I will continue to meet. I think our principals are working on training in terms of the planning that they've done. And I really do want to stress that I like the idea of a video walkthrough. So we'll try to put that together next week as well. The only other thing, Madam Chair, that I wanted to talk about is something that Dr. Weiner said at the Board of Health meeting about my being available to the Board of Health. And Dr. Weiner, I'm certainly at your service, so I will show up whenever you'd like me to show up. And certainly my staff would be available and at the Board of Health's disposal as well. And the other thing, I just wanted to take a minute to define success, or to at least to talk to the school committee about what I'm thinking about with success, because there are lots of factors that we are in control of, but there are many that we are not in control of. And if the point of trying to get schools open and to bring students back into school is clearly we have a demand from parents that they want their students learning in person, and we're trying to accommodate that. We have given families a choice. So if families want to keep their children home, we are working on providing a high quality remote experience, very different than the spring. Than what they experienced in the spring, and a high quality in-person experience. So we're really looking to provide multiple avenues for families so they can make the choice that is best for their children and make sure there is high quality education available on either side. if in fact in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, there's a situation where we have to close schools, my point of talking about success or failure is any day where we can have the students and teachers developing positive relationships in person or remotely is a success. So if in October 1st, November 1st, December 1st, we need to go to a fully remote, any day that the teachers and students spend together is going to enhance the remote experience that they have. I just want to remind people that when we shut schools down on March 12th, teachers and families and students had already spent months getting to know one another. Relationships had been established, and I think that was really important, an important factor in having us get through the spring. To start a school year when there were no relationships established, I think is a much different educational task, and so I think. It's really important that we bring students back and try to establish those relationships again, both remotely and in person. And I think that is just going to enhance the learning that takes place. We can't have learning without those relationships. And to be quite honest with you, it's a real strength of our teachers in Burlington is they do a great job, not only sort of teaching the content-based standards that they need to teach, but they really do it from, I think, a foundation of really solid relationships with their students. And we really want to enhance that. So I'm not looking at a number of days to say, boy, if we stay open 5 days, that's a success, or 10 days, or 50 days. Any day that we have, any safe week that we have, where those relationships are building and learning is taking place, is a successful week. So I just wanted my chair to sort of state that I don't really have metrics for success or failure based on whether schools are open or closed.
Thank you. One other thing. We have a school committee board of health subcommittee that is going to be meeting regularly on top of everything else here. And that is made up of myself, Dr. Wayne Saltzman, Carl Foss, and Martha Simon. Martha is on the line here. Martha, do you have any comments to that? And I want to make sure that you got all of your comments in.
Well, I just do feel like it was really wise that we set up the subcommittee this year. And I look forward to any ways that subcommittee can also help, because the communication between the Board of Health and the school committee, as has been mentioned, is going to be crucial. I do know we'll be relying a lot on Dr. Conti and Ms. Luminello, because they are the point person, and Mrs. Conley as well. So I think we'll all be working, but in any way that subcommittee can add to what we're doing in terms of communication or follow through or any of that, I'm looking forward to making sure that we use it effectively. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Martha. It's a pleasure to work with you. Chris Monaco, Madam Chairman, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I just have a couple of quick things. First of all, did we cover everything, Ed, that you and I had talked about covering?
Yes, that and more. But I just want to reiterate, if people feel they don't have the answers, please call.
Okay. I'd also like to say, I hope you were all amused by my having to walk around the house in order to keep the signal. I really need to tell my neighbors not to use their internet when I have these meetings. So I would just like to take a minute to say that in my time working with the schools and the Board of Health, I have never seen the two committees work together so closely and so well. As I said earlier, Ed and I have known each other for years, and it's easy for us to make a quick call and talk and figure out what we need to do and when we need to do it. But it's kind of interesting, and it's just a great relationship, and I'm glad that the two boards are working so well together. I'd like to thank the both committees, the Board of Health and the school committee, for all of their work and input. all of the staff. And I'd like to say that my goal, and I think the goal of everyone involved, is to get our students and staff back to school safely. And Eric, I hope that your discussion about whether it's a week or 2 weeks, I hope it's the entire year without any, we only go more, have full days by a certain point, and back to our full normal schedule, because it is so important for our kids to be learning again. So there have been a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and I don't know if there's anyone else on the committee. Okay, Eric, I see you, but is there anyone else on the committee that hasn't had a chance to say anything or? Okay, go ahead, Eric.
Again, Madam Chair, I think as I tried to say at the beginning, how long schools stay open is a function of the schools in our planning, but it's also a function of the community as a whole. That's why it's so important that the two boards work together. And I think as long as the rates in the community of Burlington stay low, as long as our parents continue to screen their kids, as long as our teachers and staff continue to screen themselves, and everyone practices safe behaviors. We're only as safe as the people who practice the least amount of caution. And if we all practice that caution, then I do think schools can stay open longer. Bob, there are, again, a couple questions, and I just want to make sure I'm framing them is, will all HVAC issues be fixed by the start of school was one of the questions. And then what schools' HVAC systems are being fixed now? And again, Bob, I've learned a little bit from you, and the schools, the units that weren't working, that's not the entire HVAC system. Those are the classroom, the classroom univents. Is that correct? So it's not a whole school that has a problem. It's just an individual classroom machine. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Dr. Conti. So we've identified, I'm going to say multiple, but not in a high sense or percentage wise, multiple events that either historically have not worked, not in classrooms per se, but maybe when there's multiple ones, like in the cafeteria. For example, the middle school cafeteria has 6. During the renovations, when the cafeteria was changed, one of them has not been repaired since. But the way the new design was in place, they've only been functioning on less than that. So again, like we've identified situations like that in other classrooms. Let's say at Fox Hill, we identified 2 that were not working, and we have actually ordered the parts on those. One, I believe, was already fixed yesterday. Another one should be fixed relatively soon, just once the part's available. Today, tomorrow, I will update you on that. But again, we're talking individual units, not full, let's say, air systems up on the roof at the high school or things like that. So most of our buildings do have univents in each particular classroom. So that's multiple HVAC systems per room. Only the high school, one section of the middle school, and Memorial have the air top units that provide HVAC through vents in the classroom. Everywhere else, individual heating and HVAC equipment.
So you said a small percentage. Are you talking 5 units, 10 units? I just don't want to be accused of being evasive. So is there a number?
To be safe, let's say 10, given the fact that the middle school has 6 in that one particular room, 2 at Fox Hill. There's definitely a few more, but definitely, yeah, I would say closer to 10, definitely not 5.
And then
not 25 either, so.
And we're planning they should be fixed, you said, as soon as we get the parts. So it's going to be in a couple weeks. We should have all the units functioning.
Less than a couple of weeks, like I said. Once they were identified already, our company HVAC trained and our in-house staff has already begun to look at those and already repair what they can with parts that are available. And then other parts that weren't available were on order. I'm not expecting a week's delay. I'm expecting some to be done now and some to be done in the next few days.
Okay.
If there's a delay, I will let anybody know, including the school committee and yourself.
Madam Chair, I didn't mean to grill Bob, but those are the questions that we're picking up on Facebook. So I just wanted to make sure we were clear in our answers.
Okay, so I would like to just thank the community for the hard work they've put in for social distancing, hand washing, wearing masks. Clearly, it's paid off. Please, from all of us on both boards, continue to do that and keep our community safe. Does anyone else wish to speak? Catherine?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I know some people may have logged in late or whatever, and we had mentioned that we got reports late today in terms of the HVAC systems and everything. Could you just re-explain to people who may have missed it, how are we going to share that information with the community? And then also, when we start to run new testing, once the kids are back in school, how are we going to communicate that, and how often are we going to do that?
I can answer that, or
Go ahead, Bob.
yeah. So we plan to, again, we just got some of the data today, some of it a day or two ago, and so we just need to review it. But we will be posting that on our website. That is the air quality testing. That is the reports from BLW. That's the HVAC assessment. And then as we continue air quality testing the first week of school, we will also put those results, once we get them, onto the website as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anything else to come before the committees? Dr. Weiner, are you all set?
Yes. I want to say thank you again for everybody who was on, both the school committee, their staff, the Board of Health members. I can't say enough about all of you, and especially Susan Luminello, who works 7 days a week. I know that Mr. Conti does the same. And I can tell you that all of us, every one of us who is involved in this community has had sleepless nights just thinking about, did we do everything to keep our kids safe? So I want to say thank you. I want to say be safe, be well, and wash your hands, wear your masks. And if you can't wear a mask, social distance when you're outside. And with that, good night from me.
Okay, good night. And thank you from us too, Susan. You're doing fabulous work. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second that. It's Martha Simon.
Okay,
We have to do a roll call.
Yep. So the school committee will adjourn. Mr. Murphy,
Aye.
Ms. Simon, Ms. Bond,
Aye.
Mr. Foss, Chairman votes aye, and the school committee is adjourned.
Board of Health, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have a second? Somebody's on mute. Mary Beth, you're on
Second.
mute.
Second.
Okay, that's, I think, Libby Wallenjevich. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. McSweeney,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
Mary Beth,
Aye.
and I am aye. I think Dr. Saltzman has left. Is that correct? Yes, 4-0-0. Good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you
night,
so
and
much.
thank you.
Aye.
Thank you.